Today we're going to work on a 2013 Dodge Journey. I replaced the power steering pump in it previously and it did not fix the problem. So that means we got to change the power steering rack. So that's what we're going to do today. The first thing we got to do is disconnect the end of the steering column from the rack, which hides underneath here. So we have to move this insulation underneath the driver's side. You're going to peel the carpet back so that we'll be able to get to that coupling bolt. We'll start out by just grabbing this little panel along the door and pulling that out. Maybe. So we'll kind of grab that, pull up, that releases this clip down here, pull over, that pulls some clips off to the side. We have a clip up there too, actually it's just a little long piece that goes up in there. So now we got that out, we'll set it aside. That should allow us to pull our carpet back. So I pulled our carpet back. It's got some insulation material on back. I try to roll that back a little. I had to pull it out from underneath this bracket over here. Just pulls away. Just roll that up and kind of shove it over here out of the road somewhere as much as we can, just under the seat. So I'm going to give you a little better view. Right back there is the coupling that we have to undo. That silver bolt is the one we have to remove, and then we remove the coupling from the top of it. I've just pulled the little insulation over to the side and put it under the gas pedal just to keep it over there. Looks to me like it's about a 13mm bolt that I'll have to remove. But before we do that, we need to make sure the steering wheel is in the forward position, straight ahead. A steering wheel lock between the steering wheel and the seat so that it keeps the steering wheel pointed in the proper direction. It also keeps the clock spring inside the column in the proper location so that blinkers will work and things like that later. So my dad, being a retired mechanic, had this little steering wheel lock gizmo that goes between the seat and the steering wheel. So I aim the steering wheel straight forward, put that in place so that it keeps it from moving. And now I'll go ahead and take out the bolt down underneath down there. So I got my ratchet with a short extension, got it broke loose, and now I just take that bolt out of there, maybe. Okay, so I loosen that screw enough to reach in there and pull that out now. Next thing we need to do is there's some little clips, white clips right here that we got to get a screwdriver and push in. That's attached to the rubber boot back in there. And so we've got to push these little clips in. There's 4 of them, it looks like. Maybe 5 up there at the top. Hard to get to, of course. But that whole plastic assembly then will come out with the rack. Before I undo the clips, I need to pry our coupling apart. So I'm just put a little screwdriver under there, pry up, and pull that off, and you see that that whole coupling comes off of there, and we can kind of pull that toward us and get it out of the way. So now we're going to take our same screwdriver push the clip in on all the clips. There's one there, one up there near the top. And we got another one clear over there. Not sure how we're supposed to get to that one, but I'll reach up in there with my finger and pull it out. Then we should be able to shove that whole plastic assembly down through the floor, and it'll come out with the rack. Alright, so I reached up there with my hand. I was able to pull that last clip, and that freed this assembly up here so that it'll come out when we get ready to take it out from the bottom. Once we've undone the coupler inside, we're ready to go ahead and lift the vehicle. Everything else we're going to do will be underneath. So we'll go ahead and do that. I like to go up about halfway so that I can take the tires off. While it's short enough I can lift them easier. You can do it however you prefer. For this job we'll need to take off both tires on the front. So we'll go ahead and do that. So now that I've got both tires off, we need to, this bolt right here, we got to remove the nut from the end of the tie rod end, and we also need to remove our lower ball joint bolt or nut because we'll be dropping that up part of the A-frame down and it needs to be separated. Those are the only two things we need to undo though. We can leave the axles and the strut and the drag links all connected. We need to do that on both sides. So it turns out that if you don't hold the bottom of the bolt that goes up to the tie rod ball joint, then it won't, it just spins when you turn the nut. So we have to get a wrench on the bottom of this, which I believe is 10 millimeter. I'll let you know for sure in a minute. And then we get our 18 millimeter ratcheting end wrench, or you can just do it without a ratcheting end wrench, just take longer. I'm also going to spray these with WD-40 or PB Blaster so that it loosens them up on both of them down here and up here. In order to get to those bolts easier, I'm just going to grab onto the wheel and pull that around so that I can have more space in between here to be able to get to that. I tried to figure out what size this bottom part was. 9 millimeters as close as I can get it. 9 millimeter. 8's too small. 3/8 is too big. 11/32 doesn't fit. So it's kind of some oblong size that nobody knows. So if you don't have a socket that's pretty close, I have this 9 millimeter socket. The nut is 18 millimeters. You might want to just use a crescent wrench, but I like to break it loose first. So I'll put my wrench on there, pull that, and it comes loose. Now, if that tapered shaft is jammed in there good enough, you might not even need to hold that. In this case, I don't. It looks like for now at least. So I'm going to pull that down as far as I can go before it does start turning, and if it doesn't turn, that's just as well. Now I'm going to leave that nut on there just temporarily because I'm going to hit this part with a hammer to knock this loose. There's also a puller you can buy that will go on there and pull that out. Same with our bottom ball joint. But if you tap that with a hammer, it'll knock it loose and it should come out. I leave the nut on so if I miss and hit the bolt, I don't ruin the threads. Now that I've done that, tie rod end on the other side, I'll pull it this way on this side. And I need to loosen this one the same way I did the other one. So again, I'll just break it loose. Maybe you gotta go the right way. Now you can see This one is turning. As I turn the nut, the bottom one turns. So I have to hold the bottom of that shaft with my 9mm ratchet so that it won't. So I'll put my ratchet up there first, my ratcheting end wrench rather. Now you see if I turn it, it goes the same way, so I have to reverse my ratchet. And now I can hold it while I ratchet that off. So I got that nut loose. We'll go ahead and take it off. And as I was loosening that, this tie rod end just popped right out. So we'll just pull that right out and let it dangle right down there. So now we're over on the driver's side again. This one doesn't come out easily. I try to lift, nothing happens. So I need to tap on the end of this bracket here, on the end of the tie rod arm. And I'm going to leave that nut on there again, just like I told you before. Hit that till it knocks it loose. Don't pound on the shaft or the bolt. Okay, do not pound on the end of the bolt because that'll mushroom it and ruin your tie rod end. If you hit right there 2 or 3 times with a pretty healthy hammer, it'll knock that loose. Then you can go ahead and take the nut off and we'll remove that one and let it dangle like the other one. Okay, and we'll just let that hang. Now we need to remove the ball joint bolts or nuts. We've lifted the vehicle a bit higher and now we can get to this bottom ball joint nut a lot easier. So I'm just going to use my impact. I believe that's an 18mm too. We'll just buzz both of them off on each side. Again, I'm going to leave the nut on there temporarily because I may have to whack on this to drop it down. I'll do the other side as well. We'll go ahead and bump that one off and put the nut back on just temporarily again in case we have to knock it loose. So to knock that loose, I'm going to pull this over out of the way so I have room to swing right here. I'm going to take my hammer again and hit it a time or two. Then I notice it comes down and loosens. I need to do that on the other side as well. Again, I'll pull this around out of the way. I want to make sure I'm not going to hit that. And I'm going to tap here. There we go. Now that comes loose, just like that. So now we have both those loose, we can go ahead and remove this lower nut on both sides. And that allows us to pull that down out of the road, or it'll just swing down later on. So here's what we're going to do. We have to take off this cross member. And that means we got to remove these 2 big long bolts here. This cross bolt that holds the front engine mount. And then we'll come back here and remove these 4 bolts, and that whole cross member should drop down. So that center cross member is pretty big, so I added a transmission jack to just support that. Now I know because I've had it off before that I can lift that pretty easy, but it is kind of long and weird shaped. So I like to support it with this transmission jack just right underneath there. And then as I take those bolts out, if it decides to drop a little, it's not gonna, or if it drops and I can't control it, the jack will help support it. So I'll take out this cross bolt first. It's a 15mm. Now we'll take out the 2 front cross member bolts. Those are 18mm. They're pretty long. They also have a little rubber boot here that we want to take off. so that we don't lose those. The next thing I need to do is undo these two power steering hoses, and I found that it's an 18 millimeter, and if I come in from this side I can kind of get to it, but then when I pull down it hits the bottom one and won't release. So two things I can do will be to try to get the bottom one loose and out of the way first. So I just stick that in there kind of upside down. Now it's best if you use a tubing wrench for this, but I didn't have an 18 millimeter, so I tried it with both of these and it broke them both loose. This one, the top one, I had to come in from the top just a little and grab it underneath and pry up, and that came loose. Now I've also put down a couple of drain pans on the floor because the power steering fluid's going to drain out as I loosen those, and I need to be able to catch that. The book says you can siphon it out of the power steering reservoir. I saw another guy who put a clamp on this hose like a vice grips, so I might try that. So this bigger one is our high pressure, it looks like. This small one then would be our feed, so I think I might try that. I might put a vice grips on that to clamp the hose. You want to be careful doing things like that though, because if you pinch that hose or cut it, or it's kind of brittle and you squeeze it, it could crack. So just barely close it enough with the vice grips that it will stop the flow but not hurt the hose. So I found this pair of needle nose type vice grips. I adjusted them down and tightened it. You want to make sure you put that up on the hose and not down over the metal part, because you don't want to compress the metal part. So now that we have that taken care of, it shouldn't leak as much. It probably still will leak. So we'll pull our drain pan over, and I'm going to reach up there and loosen those the rest of the way. Alright, it looks like it doesn't want to come out until we loosen these two retainer bolts that hold that up onto that cross member. So we'll loosen those two 10 millimeter bolts first, and then we'll loosen those. And yep, it's starting to leak. So I'll use my my little buzz box here and take that one out and this one, and I'll pull those out by hand and put in my box. That released that good, so now I can move the ends of those hoses if I need to get that out of there. So now I'll reach up and loosen both of those hoses off the rack. That's the top one. I think I'll come in from the side and do the bottom. And then I'll just lift those down so they can drip into our oil pan. I need to mark this alignment between the body and our mount in two different places. So I've marked it with a pen right up there, and then up on the frame with a paint pen, and then right there, that arrow, and a line down on that mount. I need to do that on the other side of the vehicle as well. So with the transmission mount holding up, I'm going to take this rear one out. It's an 18 or 21 millimeter. Do that on both sides. That's a pretty heavy duty bolt there. A ratchet with, then put my 21 on it, and I'm going to go up through this hole in the bottom It's really in there. Okay, now that I have it broken loose, I'll do the other side and then I can take both those out the rest of the way with my impact. So now I'll stick my impact up in there on an extension and we should be able to buzz that out. We'll do the other side too. Now we'll go ahead and take out these support bracket bolts. And take off the bracket. Now what we need to do is lower the whole subframe down until our tape measure says we've come down about 3 inches. We don't want to go more than that yet. Eventually we can drop it lower. So with my tape measure in place, I'm going to slowly lower that. So we've lowered it down till our back is about 1.5 inches. But that means the whole thing's kind of just swinging on this rear transmission bolt. So I need to take that through bolt out first. Let's see if I can figure out how to show you this. I need to take out this bolt up here that goes through and holds this rear transmission mount on, and then I take off this bolt, and then 2 on the front that allows me to get that whole bracket out of there. Then I'll be able to lower it down some more. So I'm actually going to raise it just a hair more so that I can get my end wrench in there and remove that bolt at the top. So I had to reach up inside there, lower the whole subframe down just a little bit, reach up inside there and kind of pull this boot off to the side. It came off the top of this steering shaft. Pull that off to the side so that I can get to this bolt, which wouldn't come out any further because that rubber thing was in the way. That's our dust boot and keeps the air and stuff out of the passenger compartment when we're driving, so you want to hang on to that. Try not to destroy it and pull that out the side. Then I need to raise this up again till that bolt is more straight in the hole, and then I can reach up and pull that out now, I think. Okay, so that bolt just went right through there and I pulled it out. Now we should be able to lower that down a little more. I did notice up here further there's a cable going through there that I need to unhook. It looks like it's just probably the transmission shift cable. Now we have the cross bolt out. We'll go ahead and lower this subframe down a ways slowly and check to make sure things aren't connected that are going to hold us up, like that set of pliers I put on. Okay, and then we can go ahead and drop that down. Right here, this big long thing with the rubber boots on, that's our rack that we're trying to get out. That means we'll need to finish taking off this center engine mount bracket. We also got to take off that heat shield over there. Now that I've taken the 4 bolts out, I can reach up in here and grab this transmission mount and pull it out. And that'll open that up nice so I can get to my other 2 bolts in my heat shield. Now I've come over here on the other side and I'm going to take out this 10mm bolt. And that one, so that I can move this heat shield back and get it off the top of the rack. So it looks like I am going to have to pull those little plastic pins on the heat shield. As I tried to pull it back, it just popped one out anyway over here. You can't really see it too well, but it popped out of there, so I'm going to reach under here with the screwdriver. I don't know why they even make these lights. They never work. Never go where you need them. Pin and pry up. See if we can get that one out. It really didn't look that bad, but it must be something internal. So we'll go ahead and replace it with our used one, which fortunately looks the same. We'll go ahead and slide that up in there and put this all back together and kind of in reverse order. So I have the replacement rack here. Going to go ahead and slip that up inside and line it up with our bolts. Then I'll put a bolt in. And our other one. I want to check the position of this little squared off shaft. If you look down on top, you can see it's flattened off on the edges. And I want to have that in about the same position for the new one as I did the old one. We see there's a little pin on this side, kind of a little divot for the bolt to go through that holds the coupler on. So I want to turn the one that I'm putting on to match that position about as close as I can get it. Hopefully, when they took it out, they left it pretty close, and it looks like they probably did. We have the bolt here. We have the flat shaft over here. I think we're going to leave it about where they have it. It should be pretty close to what we need it. Then I'll go ahead and cinch down my two bolts for the holding that rack in place. We'll put our heat shield back on, and then we can put our transmission bracket back on. So once I got this rear motor mount out, I found out that it was broken. So I ordered a new one. And it's not broken. Next, we're going to go ahead and put this rear engine mount back in. That only goes one way. You'll notice that one edge is kind of straight down and the other bumps out and down. The bump out goes toward you. If you try it the other way, it won't fit. So we'll go ahead and tighten, well, not tighten, but get our bolts all fingers started. And then we'll snug those down finger tight, but not all the way because we have some play in there. That way we can hopefully line up our through bolt easier. This new pump comes with our two hose holes plugged, so we'll pull those little red plugs out of there, hopefully. Now we need to jack that up while we kind of adjust the direction of this until we can line up our through hole with our mount bolt. So you may have to wiggle things around. Again, this is why we left that. Left our bracket bolts loose. Now we can go ahead and put our through bolt through up there. We're going to come in from the left side because that gives us a little bit more room. Remember, we haven't put on our rubber boot yet because it's in the way for this bolt to go in. So we might have to raise or lower this, wiggle it around, and through the hole. Then I'll go ahead and get that as far in as I can go with my hands. And then before we tighten anything up there, we'll add our rubber boot so that it will go up into the hole before we start attaching other parts. So right now that's about as finger tight. It still moves. but it's in place. I get our rubber boot that needs to go on like that. There's a little bit of a groove right here so that it'll go down over the shaft. So I'm gonna kind of wiggle that up in there. May have to lower this just a little more if I can. You don't want to go too much because we don't want to put too much pressure on that new motor mount. So we'll poke that up there. Kind of force that rubber up over. And then snap it down. So I'm trying to pull this boot down, and we got this little curved part that goes over the curved part of the rack. So pull that down till it kind of snaps over. That'll help align it up here with our rubber part that has to go up through the floor. Next thing we're going to do is we have to raise this up until our big frame bolts line up with those marks. There's one, and the other one is right up there on the frame. We want to line those back up, and then we will also align our holes with these back bracket bolts so that we can reinstall that subframe. First though, I'm going to reach up and put that transmission cable back up into its little clip up there so that I have room to do that. Otherwise I won't after we push it up where it needs to be. Now we need to go ahead and carefully raise this while we align it with our bolt holes. For now we're just trying to get them aligned so that we can get our big bolt up through there. Looks like that one's close. I'll continue to raise that up slightly and get that started. Now, there's also this little plate that goes on there. So I need to be sure and put that on, but I'm going to start with the other side first. So I'll take our little plate and put it on there. It's basically a big washer on our big bolt. And this side needs to come back and over a ways. There we go. Looks like we're lined up, but I need to raise it some more. So I'll push that up with our transmission jack. And now we're able to get some threads to start. Now I'll go ahead and put the plate on the other side and get it finger tight as well. So I've installed the plate on the bolt. I'll go ahead and get that bolt started again and go finger tight. Now we're going to take our support brackets and get them started as well. So I'll just put those in here towards the back. And again, we're just getting everything started, but not tightening it until we get things lined up where we want it. So I'll do both brackets, and then we'll do the long bolt that goes up through the middle. So now I'll take the long bolt, poke that up through, and just get it started finger tight. You notice the bracket's still really loose. I didn't even tighten them finger tight really. Just getting them close. Then I'll go ahead and do the other side. When I put bolts in, even if I'm just going finger tight, I try to get it in a few threads with my fingers and then go ahead and put them in a little ways further with my wrench. I'm not trying to tighten it yet. I just want to put it in and make sure it's going in without cross threading. Then later I'll come back with my impact and hit them. Now that I have everything tightened by hand and the threads started, I'm going to go ahead and cinch down the two mount brackets. I'll leave the big bolt loose because we've got to make sure everything's lined up with our marks that we made before we keep going. Then I'll do the other side as well. Now I need to line up the two marks that we made earlier when we were disassembling. Hopefully you'll be able to see these, but we have this mark here lined up with the one we made on the frame, and then back here we have the one with the arrow lined up with that metal piece on our bracket. So this side's pretty close. So I'm going to snug this side up just a little bit. Probably not cinch it down yet, but that way I can go check the other side and make sure we're good as well. So I'll give my impact, put it up through the hole in the bottom. I guess I'll go ahead and cinch it down. It's already pretty close, but that way we're lined up pretty well on this side. So we'll go do the same process for the other side. I lined up the marks on the other side and cinched it down. Double check the marks on this side and go ahead and cinch them down. And then you want to be sure and torque these to the right amount. Now that we've cinched down the two mount bolts on the back and the two main bolts on the front, we'll go ahead and cinch down these back bolts too. And that'll help keep everything in place. Do both sides. Now we can go ahead and connect our two hoses back up. They'll only fit one way. They're both the same diameter, but the lengths are a little different. So we'll go ahead and put those on. So I found it was easier to install the bottom hose first. And you definitely want to just do this finger tight until you know it's in several turns. If you don't get that lined up just right, you'll strip that, and then you got to do this all over again. So I reached up through here, tightened that one in by hand. I had to move this hose left or right a little bit till it'd go in. Now I'll go ahead and get the, actually I think what I'll do is align it down here with our bolt hole and get that started. Snug this one up. And then I will go ahead and put the top one in and snug it down. So this low pressure line has kind of a bracket on it, and so does a high pressure, but the bracket on the low pressure goes behind the high pressure one and then up against it and into the hole. And I aligned both of those, one here and one here, get it started, but it's not tight yet until we get our second hose up there lined up and connected. But I want to tighten the bottom nut first, and then I'll do the top one and tighten it up. I'll put my 18mm wrench in and snug that bottom one up. Now you just want it snug, you don't want to strip it. Again, if you had a tubing wrench, it'd probably be better to keep it from rounding the corners. So now I can go ahead and start my top one into the hole. And again, just by your fingers, get it started and screwed in quite a ways before you try to use a wrench on it so you don't strip the threads. So we got that one pretty snug. Now we'll go ahead and put our 18mm on it. This was the problem I had with the other one. I have to come in from a different angle. So I'll come in at the top and pull this down. Snug it up the rest of the way. Now that I have the two hard lines connected, I can tighten these two, this one here and the one over there, that hold my hoses in place. I can also remove my vice grips. So now that everything's back together and impossible to reach, I need to reach up and tighten that through bolt, and then I also need to finish tightening my mount bolts. So I'm going to tighten the mount bolts first with a 16mm end wrench, and then I need to reach up there with a 15 and tighten the through bolt. So when I came up here to do these front two, to tighten them up, since I'd forgotten to do that earlier on our rear engine mount, they were impossible to reach. So what I had to do is loosen those two big bolts, and that one right there on both sides. Lowered it down about half an inch, 3/4 of an inch. That allowed me to get my end wrench on this left one, but the right one, there's still no hope unless you come over on the outside. And then I got a ratchet with a 1-inch extension, 16mm, and put that on there, and I was able to tighten that up. So I went ahead and snugged that up. Now I'll go ahead and tighten the big bolt again on both sides, and then double check to make sure our marks underneath are still lined up, and then we should be good to go. We need to torque the body mount bolts to 100 foot-pounds. So I'll do these two front big ones and then the two back ones under here. There, I can get the light out of the way. These two back ones, 100 foot-pounds. So I've set the torque wrench at 100 foot-pounds. I'll put that up onto our front bolt and go until it clicks. We'll do that to our back one as well without the extension. I feel like that gives it a little too much flex, so I don't use it if I don't have to. I'll do that for the other two on the other side of the vehicle. Now I need to reach up in there and tighten the through bolt on our rear engine mount. So I'll get a 15mm end wrench and do that next. Now we need to go ahead and put our cross member that goes up here from the front to the back. So with the help of the transmission jack, I've set that cross member back up on there. I've started the very back bolt, and now I'll use leverage to just push the front of this up and line up our through bolt so that it is started to help hold the front of that bracket. Now I'll go ahead and install the long bolts, and then the rest of the back bolts. I'm also going to tighten that through bolt. So I'll try to do this. My light broke, so I apologize for the lighting. Pull that down, get our ball joint in, then we'll pull this around and put our tie rod end in. Then we'll go ahead and put the nuts on both of those. So next I reached up underneath here and pushed that plastic boot up into the hole in the floor and heard it snap in, so that all we have to do now is put the end of our steering column back on our shaft, and then put our lock bolt, I guess you might call it, in through that hole and tighten it up. So I need to build a power steering bleeder adapter that will go down inside the cap and go down inside the cap and create a vacuum seal. So I went to Google, and they had something similar to this for about 20 to 30 bucks, and nobody in town had one. So I went to Cal's store in town, and I just bought one of these solid rubber plugs that are in their little drawers, and I drilled a hole in it with my drill press. Then I took a piece of this 3/8 brake line, cut it off, and pounded it down into the hole. Now, I wanted the hole in the rubber block to be slightly smaller so that it would seal around the pipe. So I looked at my drill bits and found the one that would do that, and then I just cut a piece and pounded it down in so that the bottom of it's roughly flush with the bottom of that. And now that fits right down inside that cap, and I can take my vacuum hand vacuum pump with this little adapter on it and connect that to the top of my hose. And when I put that inside there, now I can draw a vacuum on the system. So the reason I need to be able to do that is to draw the air out of the system and force the fluid down in to my rack and power steering pump before I start the vehicle. If I don't do this, it can damage the pump. So the book says that I need to fill the reservoir with ATF4, which is automatic transmission +4, or you can also get the power steering fluid that's +4, but those are the only type that will work on this vehicle. And once I fill that, then I pump it up and it'll start to draw the air out. This little container is in case any fluid comes out of the reservoir, it gets caught here instead of going into my into my pump. So I will get some ATF fluid and we'll put some in there and try it out. So for now I'm going to remove that. I'll add fluid till it gets up between the full and maximum mark. And I'll go ahead and put my little homemade adapter in there and we'll pump it up. And as I do that, the fluid in the reservoir back there is kind of lifting up, but it's also pulling the air out of the system and drawing the fluid in. If I quit pumping, you see the needles start to go down, and so does the level in the tank as it fills in the air pockets that we just pulled out. Okay, now it says to draw a vacuum clear up to 25 psi and let it sit for no less than 3 minutes to be able to draw everything out. Do not turn on the vehicle while you're doing this, because since there's not fluid down in all parts yet, it can damage things. So let that bleed down a little and then we'll top off our fluid again. It says continue this process until no more fluid can be taken after the vacuum's released. Now that our vacuum's dropped down, we'll pop our adapter out of there and add some more fluid. Now we've filled up much of our reservoir here, so I'm thinking probably we're pretty close. So at this point we need to raise the vehicle and steer it lock to lock about 3 times. That means all the way left, then all the way right, then all the way left, then all the way right, 3 times. And that helps get the rest of the air out of the system. And then we just make sure it's at the correct level, and we should be good. We also want to check underneath for any leaks, drips, that sort of thing from connectors or the pump itself. The next thing I did was reinstall the coupler onto the shafts, and it was off kilter just a little bit. So I took my steering adapter off and I turned the wheel just slightly up here until it lined up down there enough to go over the shaft. So now I just install the bolt and tighten that. Then I can go ahead and install the insulation back over it. The clips all came through from the bottom, and then I can go ahead and put my carpet all back in and my trim. Now that I've got the inside put together, I've backed it up on the hoist again. I filled the power steering reservoir with fluid, and now I'm going to turn it lock to lock 3 times and make sure that we got all the air out of the system. Then I'll recheck the fluid. And come over and check our fluid level, clean off our marks. Okay, looks like we're a little high, but I think we'll still be okay. So we'll go ahead and kind of clean up this area and go ahead and put our lid back on. Success. That worked. Thank goodness. That was a lot of work, but it wasn't too terrible. I've worked on worse. By the way, the total cost of this little vacuum adapter that I built, since I already had the brake line, that grommet was about $1.60. Much better than $20 to $30 like they were trying to get online. Since we had our front tires off, we need to go ahead and torque those. I torqued those to about 100 foot-pounds. And I go in a star pattern. And I'll do that on the other side as well. So good luck, be careful, and that's about the end of this video. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you on the next one.